Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for coming along today. As you just heard, my name's Jonathan, and I'm a designer and co-founder of Pearlfisher. And for those that don't know, we are a brand design agency based in London and New York, and it was started actually just over 30 years ago, and we're celebrating our 30th birthday tonight, actually. We called ourselves Pearlfisher, not because there was a Mrs. Pearl and a Mr. Fisher, but because of a metaphorical idea that we wanted to embrace in the way that we went around designing for our clients, and something that would sort of build value for those brands and for ourselves over the years. So it was this idea of diving deep to find the gem in the creative thought process that was kind of, that we kicked around in those early days. And I can tell you, brand naming is one of the hardest things to do in the creative process. And we took inspiration from the Armour, who are the Japanese pearl divers. And it's a very elegant solution to a creative kind of concept when you're saying that you want to dive deep to get something, of value. And so this kind of image really was a sort of an inspiration for us in terms of calling us, Pearlfisher. So the idea that this comes across is a thought that has attracted people to work for us and for clients to work with us. And it's something which really kind of is an idea that transcends a way of doing business, and it appeals to people because it says design can build value. Now, we're very proud to be part of the London Design Festival as part of our 30th birthday celebrations. And as I look out at the audience today, I can see students, I can see of design, I can see designers, I can see commentators on design and more, all interested in art and culture and design. And believe it or not, I was once a 1980s design student. I had a burning desire to do only the best work. And when I left art school, there wasn't really a guiding light for me in terms of where I should go and who I should, try and sort of build a career with. And when I suppose really it was a little bit simpler in the sense that the guiding lights were a little bit like this kind of, this image, finding my way in the dark through to my career. They were the design greats of the time. And I'm talking about the well-known names that we've heard about, people like, Terence Conran and Milton Glaser and Rodney Fitch and Michael Peters, who became my first boss. But it was also, American designers like Bob Gill, who was one of the founders of the forerunners of Pentagram, which is a company which I've, always admired. And back then it was kind of easy to really understand who was a designer and what design was. And it was a kind of, it was great work stood out. It was brilliant. It shone. And I think that is been a guiding light for me all the way through my career, and hopefully with the team that work with me, who are all fantastic talents, that great work stands out, it shines out, and there should always be a responsibility of a designer and those commissioning design to do great work that does make an impact, which does solve problems. And so this idea of finding the best and doing the best is an idea that has stayed with me all my life, and as with Pearlfisher. And it's why when we think about how design can improve people's lives, it's why we say at Pearlfisher we design for life. But as Pearlfisher has grown over those 30 years, design has changed quite a lot, and the way that we design has changed quite a lot. And the backdrop to the problem that we've got today is, if you take this kind of the world that we're living in now, we are hyper-connected, we are living in an always-on world, and design is a bit like, it shines everywhere, and that's obviously a good thing. It can be created anywhere, it can be created at any time, and it can be created instantly, and now by anybody, and now by anything as we move into the age of artificial intelligence. Now, that may be a good thing. There are creators everywhere, sharing ideas, sharing inspiration, working at lightning speeds, and costs are dropping, output is increasing, and we really operate in this market where design is really a brightly saturated marketplace. And so there is a problem now for design, which I've seen emerge and really come to light, and especially in this last year, which is if we're living in a world of brightly shining design, how can you be sure the choices that we make about design really stand out and they don't just add to the noise? And how do we really make a difference and make a positive impact? So design, I think, is really facing a bit of a crossroads in terms of what it means to be a designer. What is design these days if it can be done on a handheld device in a second? So if cultures define themselves by the artifacts that they design and leave behind, how do we assess a design's true value today? Is something we need to think about in progressing lives, businesses, brands, and our culture. Are we moving into an age of design pollution? And how do we filter the brilliant from the average out? So these are questions I think need to be on the minds of all designers these days. I'd like to now move on and talk about design and culture. And cultures, as I already mentioned, define themselves by artifacts that they design. Think about all the kind of like the silverware you just walked past in order to come into this room. It says something about a past era. And a few weeks ago, I was sent this invitation by Hauser & Wirth, a leading art gallery, to the private view of an exhibition called Make in Somerset. They have a gallery there. They have one here in Savile Row as well. And it features work by Barnaby Ash and Drew Plum. And these are beautiful pieces that have been turned out of wood from the land. And it's not necessarily about the pieces that they're interested in, it's about the land, it's about the connectedness of land and nature and design. And I intend to go to this. But the thing that was interesting was only 2 weeks ago I was in Naples on holiday, and I went to Pompeii. And it was one of the most incredible experiences. I've always wanted to go there. And in the museum, in Napoli, where all the artifacts have been taken, there are thousands of pots which have been perfectly preserved in the ash that buried Pompeii in 20 meters of ash in 2 days. And so these things are perfectly preserved. And it was amazing to see all of this kind of beauty and design excellence that actually existed back then, and inherent design intelligence in the way that things were made. And clearly there is a connection between vessels now and then, and a timelessness about the way these artifacts have sort of remained in terms of true to their forms over, effectively thousands of years. And this is something that, as a designer that works a lot with brands, I see a lot of creativity going into the shapes of things that hold the products we consume every day. And this DNA can be traced back through thousands and thousands of years. And it's taking inspiration from things that are timeless, that meet timeless needs, is an essential part of the creative process. And then how do we make it original? And some of the work we did for Wagamama, which was really taking inspiration from these classic forms, really looked to see how we could take this essential need for eating in a modern take-home dynamic to create recyclable, brand-centric vessels that would keep food warm after a 20-minute journey on the back of a Deliveroo and still preserve the quality and integrity of the food that Wagamama produces, which is on brand. And so sociability plus the functional need for protecting and serving hot food again reflects this timeless need for eating and the essential things that we need, but in a 21st brand-centric personality expression. And that's where designers have to think their way through to find out what is the things that we need to keep, what are the essentials, and how do we convey something that is then relevant and unique to a particular, in this case, brand, very much a 21st century kind of concept, and make the kind of the connection, the desirability for something that is really essential in people's lives. So going back to Pompeii, I also saw hundreds of beautiful mosaics, skilled and laid down by craftsmen, creating illustrations and typography. And this is probably one of the most famous ones, the dog mosaic in the house of the tragic poet. And the writing in Romans says, "Beware of the dog. Some things are timeless and don't change." And it must have taken days or weeks to produce things like this. And the mosaics are absolutely everywhere. And so this love of our pets and the way that we introduce sort of pets into the way that we live our lives, it's evolved, and it's the same thing, but the way we do it and the way we appreciate our pets has kind of evolved. And of course, we now live in this age of social media, and we all love a dog. Most of us love a dog. Well, maybe cats don't love a dog, but and we spend a lot of time sharing images of our pets. And here's a modern mosaic, therefore, of lots of dogs. And it says something about the way that we relate to life and how we want to share our the way we live our lives. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we can take a photograph and we can add an effect to it, and we can kind of make it kind of like have all sorts of kind of different ways of appealing to the viewer of that. And these images, they come and they go, and they become faster and faster, and they become intangible, digitized impressions of culture. So we're moving from a time where we've got physical objects that are timeless or that say something about our current culture to a digitized world of imagery which says something about the way we live our lives. The interesting thing to make this image for you today, this mosaic, I actually used artificial intelligence. None of these are actual photographs of hands. They've all been created in seconds. And so I've simply put this into Mid-Journey, and 20 seconds later, I got all those images. And so they're not real photographs. They are a representation of the way we're living our life. And so what is this? What is the kind of artifacts then that we are leaving for future generations to judge ourselves on? Is it a digital universe of intangible impressions, or is it a real-world mountain of physical excess? So this smartphone mountain must remind us of the fact why we have a responsibility as designers to think about the impact that we're creating on the world. And it's no wonder that Apple has recently, in the last few weeks, announced its carbon neutral design program. And I don't know if any of you have seen the Mother Nature film that they've put out to go with it. It's very entertaining. And it's a commitment to design all their products to be carbon neutral by 2030. And you could say, quite right so, maybe a little bit too late. But we are now very aware of the impact of climate change that we as humans make on the environment. And designers have a responsibility to be able to change for positive the way that we live our lives. And it begs the question of all the designers out there, what is the role and responsibility of designers and those who commission design today? So I would like you to think about that. The students of design out there, the young people coming into design, people that are maybe running their own design companies, and those that are commissioning products. In a world where we desire the next thing, as an emotive response, that we are driven by the next shiniest object, what is the responsibility in terms of that impact that we are creating on society? So to answer this, I think we need to think about the power of design and emotional intelligence within design. And I just wanted to just kind of like go backwards and forwards in time during this presentation. And in my mind, the best designers have always been cultural hoovers. They sort of intuitively like hoover up, suck up inspiration all the way around them. And they kind of like took that into the work that they're doing, and then it comes out as a kind of like a fantastic piece of work. And the stimulus and that goes in produces things which are really great examples of creative intelligence. And some designers are more analytical and more strategic in the way they approach things. And that analytical approach, or fluid intelligence, involves planning and following a path and defining and going down a set process. And so this random way of hoovering things up and then spewing out something creative, or defining and following a very set path to get to a different outcome. There are many different ways of doing it, but ultimately this emotional response to design and how it relates to a consumer is where empathy plays a massive role in solving real world problems. So we all know the design classics, that become defining in the way that they create a distinctive aesthetic, and that create flashes of brilliance to provide solutions to the way that we live our lives and become essential. But we also kind of appreciate the fresh, the new, the seemingly random, visuals that come and forms that come from a very sort of almost otherworldly kind of place. And for someone who, like Yayoi Kusama, who has a very distinctive aesthetic, for it then to be then utilized by a leading luxury brand says something about the power of the freshness of ideas, the role and responsibility to find the new and to project it in a way that is creates new ways of people living better lives and in an enjoyable way. So the functional side of living to the emotional side of living, great designers employ this innate sense of empathy through their work to create fantastic solutions that make our lives better. But we don't all have the luxury of being able to kind of hoover up amazing amounts of stimulus all the time in order to create flashes of brilliance. But it's why at Pearlfisher, one of the things that we did about 20 years ago was establish a team of future thinkers who were there to really see the big shifts in culture. And it's their role within my company to provide the inspiration, which now comes in on a daily stream of, and torrent of richness, to filter out what we think are the most important things which are affecting our lives today, and which we can then take as nuggets of information and filter that into the work that we do, and to provide intelligent solutions and work that really does make a difference to help solve particular problems. So let's talk about health and give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you have a headache, for example, you go to the chemist and you need some paracetamol, or you need Nurofen, or you might have a backache, or you might have a blister. And that world of kind of branding and messaging when you go to a chemist or a pharmacy can be quite bewildering. And the graphics and the branding there, it's very competitive, and it always deals with the problem. It always deals with a glowing red dot of pain, usually on a foil board so it shines a little bit, with a big kind of radiant brand name saying, pain, 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 I'm the solution. But the thing is, that doesn't really empathize with the person that's suffering from a problem. It may be a minor ailment, but you're still not feeling great when you go to a chemist to get something. And what you really want is to be spoken to like a human being. And these kind of insights, this kind of this shift in the way that people want to be spoken to as a human being, were things that my team picked up 15 years ago. And we're talking about a much more empathetic, a human way that brands need to speak to people. And that's what led to this particular range of work, Help Remedies, which literally speaks in a very, very simple way to people. This is biodegradable packaging. It's rule changing. It has a tone of voice that is unique, and it has an identity that stands out from the crowd, and it creates its own space. This tiny little pack about this big makes a big impression, and makes you feel better about yourself the moment you see which is the solution to your particular problem. So far, we've been talking about emotional and creative and analytical responses to creative, to to creating design solutions, and how those intelligences, they're different types of intelligences, all feed into the creative process. And they're not the only ones. There are all sorts of different intelligences, and I would just say that with all these different types of intelligences that are out there, the empathy, the ability to step into somebody else's world, to understand the problems they are facing, is the most essential thing that we as designers need to do. And it seems to me that having a high level of emotional intelligence often determines how well we can implement the best creative solutions. And we'll be talking about this with the panel in a minute. So we've now arrived at this point in design where in my design career, over the last 40 years, it's changed dramatically. And I mentioned those great illuminaries earlier on, and one of them was Milton Glaser. And I was in MoMA in New York, and I snapped this photograph of his original sketch of the I Love New York logo. And then you got the artwork that was pasted up by hand. It's called paste up, you know. And in those days, people cut things. There's a few smiles from some of the older designers in the room here who can remember it. And the printed finish. And it's all there, this iconic piece of work, I Love New York. And you can see it there. And his thinking was involved. His idea probably came in a flash. And he kind of went at the speed that his hand could go. You know, the sketch, the paste up, you know, doing the artwork, taking it to the print, doing the print. Everything was more hand-driven. And then when we started Pearlfisher, computer technology came along, and ideas still came in a flash after you had kind of like thought your way through. But then we went at the speed of the mouse and the processing power. And we still shaped and crafted those designs right up to the last few years. But now we're coming to this point of AI. And so we now come to this point where if you can think it, you can create it in seconds. And that's, as I've illustrated so far, is where we are now at as designers. We are now designing at the speed of thought by anyone, anywhere, at any time. So the only statistics I'm going to show you today, but it says something when it took, you know, companies like YouTube and Facebook to get to the, you know, years to get to those number of users, and yet ChatGPT managed it in 2 months. And Canva, template design, you know, company, 100 million people designing each month. These are the times that we're moving into where the act of creation may not need much human thinking whatsoever. It will come from an algorithm that is taking its kind of references, that it will be being spewed out to other people that are using it as well, or we're accepting a template kind of existence for design creation. So design is in danger, not just because of its total democratization, but because it can now be subcontracted, delegated, prompted to an artificial creative intelligence, and the outputs that AI decides to give us to steer. So we're starting from what they give us, and then we steer it to get to what we want it to be. And if it's giving us good enough responses, those photos of the hands holding the door, they were good enough for this presentation. I didn't change it, I just used the first things I got. Is good enough? Are we living in that age where good is good enough now? Who is to say whether the algorithms that are processing those images are giving somebody else on the other side of the world exactly the same response to a creative brief that you may be working on that you decide to use artificial intelligence for? So is the work we're producing original if we're subcontracting it all? So let's just illustrate that through my first exercise with AI, which I used to challenge my team with about how we're going to embrace it. So a hypothetical AI brief for eco-packaging for McDonald's, and what would that look like? And it came out looking like this. And it's an AI-first response. It would clearly need, you know, more crafting, but, you know, first response in 20 seconds to get to that level of visualization. You know, that is a public response to those words that were put in there. It's got craft paper, it's reduced plastic, it looks generally eco-friendly, and with some tweaking, significant tweaking, we could, obviously upweight the McDonald's branding, but you can see it in there. So a few days on Photoshop and Illustrator figures that out, boom, we've got it. But is it original? Is that good enough? And of course, I don't expect any of you would take this and sort of work on this and show it to a client straight away. But it elevates the question of just what we could get to. And it could be used by any other fast food chain wanting to promote its credentials in an eco-friendly way. Is that good enough? So here's an image of a design my team did create for McDonald's, which is the Egg McMuffin. It's a piece of paper, recycled paper, with an image on it. No plastic. It clearly says it's an Egg McMuffin. It's branded through and through, and yet it's just a very, very simple solution. I don't think that could be created by AI. I think you could ask AI to visualize that for you, but I don't think it could come up with that idea. Maybe it will in the future, which is, again, another layer of concern. But this is a human idea tailored to a specific brand with creative empathy. And it is original, and so it works. So it demonstrates the power of imagination and a distilled thought process with this visual empathy for the consumer to create desire for that iconic brand. And it is a total reduction in waste packaging. So against this kind of backdrop of exponentially increased design democratization, instant design, I return to the question, what is the role and the responsibility of designers and those who commission design today when it is so easy? I would say for a greater good, it is to use design more intelligently through human imagination, analysis, ideas, and empathy. And this creative originality is what I call design intelligence. So, you may think I'm arguing against AI, but I'm not. I'm arguing for its kind of place in the way that we do things. I'm suggesting a perspective on AI's place and how we think about it in creativity. Human progress thrives on purposeful change through intelligent design, and it's a journey that requires intuition, bravery, and smart thinking. And so the idea that creative intelligence is emotional intelligence with the analytical intelligence or fluid intelligence and artificial intelligence will help us create this idea of design intelligence, embrace all of these qualities. And this is what I'm talking about. It has its place, but let the emotional empathy intelligence come first. So remember that mountain of smartphones that I talked about earlier. Well, this type of technology is cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and more available, reusable, and now it's in the hands of some of the poorest. These are smallholders in Kenya, and they're holding smartphones that are affordable, and they're using an app, which is an app created by a charity called the Hala Farmers app. And what this app does is take farmer training knowledge, which they have been trained physically at a farmer training center, and it brings that information to their hands. So when they are out in the fields working eroded and barren land, they've got all the techniques that they need in order to create the food that they need in order to feed a family of 6, and at the same time have a food left over to sell and create a microeconomy for themselves. And so thinking about how we can use technology and how we can place it in the hands of that need it the most to improve lives is a great example. And the team at Pearlfisher worked with app developers and the charity to create this kind of simple way of working that it can be listened to as well as read. So you can listen to this in Swahili, or you can read it in your local language. And it is now being adapted with artificial intelligence to be taken around the world. So the farming techniques, which are in a sense generic to any terroir, are adaptable to different regions other than coastal East Africa, that can be adapted for all sorts of other areas. And so artificial intelligence will play a role in being able to change languages, speak in different languages through the app. And this is what I'm talking about, is something that makes a difference for people to improve lives through an empathetic way of using design to make a big difference. So I don't think AI could have produced this. This is work for a non-alcoholic spirit, which has become one of the leading in its categories, and it involved crafting and layers of typography and illustration. It is done by hand, and it created such a sense of desire for a product which is missing in people's lives, a quality non-alcoholic alternative, as people are living more healthier lives, that this was something that a designer envisaged, imagined, created, and crafted by hand. So we're living in a time now where this all makes a difference. These are brands which are thinking about design in a much bigger, holistic way. There are philosophies, there are approaches, they're designing services, and they are providing a way to think about a country, how a country can redesign itself out of adversity, or a way to think about an economy and how that we can think about principles that are about creating better ways of living. Businesses that structure themselves like Patagonia for better. And a company like Loop, which provides insurance for marginalized communities. I'm talking about people in America who can't get car insurance because of the color of their skin or their socio-economic group. You know, we are seeing all sorts of problems now emerge in this real world where design can make a big difference. So companies and brands and designers working together can think about how you can design not just identities, but systems, and create new structures and offers that make a big difference. So we now come to towards the end of the presentation, and I want to just talk a little bit about culture and the shifts that are taking place in this world. In the last few weeks, there's been some terrible things that have happened in the world. We've heard about the earthquake in Morocco, and we've heard about the terrible flood in Libya. And it really kind of like made me feel quite bad about the fact that there didn't seem to be any out-of-the-box design solution to help people that have been displaced by these kind of like tragic events. And yes, they're dramatic and they're sudden, and unfortunately, nature will keep on doing this. But we are, as human beings, making a big impact on our climate, and we can control certain things. But it felt to me like there was a glaring opportunity for better designed responses to these kind of needs. Now, that kind of big statement is easy to say in an auditorium here, but when you're dealing with governments and logistics, I know that is a big thing to both suggest, but I don't think it's impossible. I think there have got to be ways that we can help address the real world problems through design today. And I would say designers sitting in this room today have got a responsibility, and those that are commissioning design, those that are structuring companies, to think creatively about how we can future-proof the world that we're living in. Because I think our grandchildren are going to be asking us a few questions about why we didn't think about these things right now. And you know, Rishi Sunak yesterday announced that he was putting back the ban on petrol cars by 5 years. And you've got to ask yourself, was that really a strategic decision about the health of our planet, or was it a political decision driven by his own agenda? And I think it was. Designers have the power to really kind of change things. And the idea that we can use our creative intelligence to make change is best summed up in this quote by Lou Danziger, who was a very early on American designer. And I love this quote. I come back to it all the time because it really suggests that the way that we can think through problems can make a difference. And it does suggest strategies, it does suggest analysis, and it does suggest the spontaneity of a flash of brilliance that may come from anywhere. And I would encourage you all to be thinking about how we do that. The SDGs that have been set by the United Nations do serve as a reminder that there are lots of areas of transformation that we need to work on. And as designers, we can all participate in designing for a better life. So I'm speaking to the young people out there who are studying design at the moment. Don't just aim to be good. Aim to be very good. Be original and be imaginative. Be a light that flashes, not one that stays on all the time and just blends into that light pollution of design. Be brilliant through the way that you think your problems through. And I believe that people and entities that embrace a philosophy of design intelligence will become the visual beacons and to organizations and the world around and how we can prepare for the unexpected and the inevitable. And those creators that do that will become, in my view, the new design greats. So what are the takeouts from today? I've said we're living in design in a democratized world. And there's a danger that this has led to a saturated marketplace for creativity. So this era of design pollution we could be entering, what is design, when we can't really tell what it is anymore, when it's being done in an instant and to a template. And I've said that cultures are defined by the artifacts that we're leaving behind. And what are those artifacts, those digitized artifacts and those physical artifacts? What do they say about the future when the future arrives and looks back on us? I've talked about the rise of creative AI, how it has a place in the creative process, but we shouldn't be lazy and we shouldn't be led by it. And I've talked about the concept of design intelligence, introduced as a philosophy that combines human creativity, empathy, and purpose with AI's capabilities. It's a way to create the most impactful and original design solutions. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about the role of education. It seems to me there is a movement in education these days to prioritize knowledge rather than creativity, and therefore starve the future of creative problem solvers of the future. I think there needs to be a much more even balance between creativity and knowledge in our schools. It should be embraced. And it should start early, and it should be fostered equally as important as learning the subjects, the classic subjects. So I think that we need to speak up as governments and education seek to deprioritize and marginalize creative routes to industries over a rigid way of educating students and the way that students are actually taught in quite a Victorian manner still. We need to embrace idea generation, the basis of design intelligence, and how could that be brought in as a subject which is early on is seen to be a positive and not something that is just random. And then we need to inspire and apply it to the latent design talent or the nascent design talent of today and who genuinely want to create design that will pursue change and do it in a way that will improve the world that we're living in. It is human imagination, the real powerhouse of design intelligence that delivers problem-solving ideas set to purposeful strategies that will ensure better outcomes for a rebalanced world. Now, you may not believe me, but maybe you'll believe Einstein, because he said it. And he said that a true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but it is imagination. It's all very well knowing something, but what are you going to do with it? And that's where ideas come in. And that's where those ideas have a place in culture. And never before has our culture needed more creativity and more people thinking about the problems that we're facing and how we can solve them. And so I encourage all of these brilliant minds out here and those of you that may be interested in design to think about those things and go out there and be those shining lights of the future. And that's what I hope to pick up with the panel next. And I just want to say thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope you found that useful. Thank you.